I'm Father Francis Tiso. I'm a Catholic priest working in southern Italy, where I was ordained to the priesthood 32 years ago. About 50 years ago, I met a remarkable Benedictine monk named Brother David Steindl-Rast, and I became his disciple in a way, back in those years when I was at university. And he was engaged in dialogue with Zen Buddhism. And so through Brother David and some of his confreres, I began to explore Buddhist practices and history. And like many Catholics, I started with Japanese Zen Buddhism. But fairly soon I discovered Tibetan Buddhism, and I discovered the life of Milarepa. So by the 1980s, when it was time for me to do a doctorate, I did a doctorate based on a study of the earliest biographies of Milarepa, who was one of Tibet's great yogis and poets in the 11th century. And in this week of our retreat, we've come to hear and practice some of the more profound teachings on developing the mind in such a way that we enter into a state of contemplation. And we begin to experience the formless light that surrounds us at all times, that is as close to us as our own skin, but which we don't notice. We need pointing out instructions. We need help to do this. And I've had teachings from different Buddhist teachers along the way, and have seen how this is done, and have studied the texts in Tibetan myself. But another thing that I've tried to do over the years is to understand these practices in the light of our own Christian tradition. Many people will ask me, well, Father Francis, why do you study Buddhism? And isn't that in some way risking a betrayal of Christianity? Well, my response is, of course, that we are called, I think, by God to engage in dialogue with people of all kinds of religions, all the races of the world, all the cultures of the world. I published in the year 2016 a book that began as a study of one case of the so-called rainbow body. The rainbow body is a rather remarkable and controversial realization. It manifests the spiritual realization of a great master. This particular individual was a monk in eastern Tibet. He passed away in 1998, and according to the eyewitness accounts of his friends, disciples, and relatives, his body completely dissolved in about 8 days. So we interviewed these people in the year 2000, exactly 2 years after the events occurred. So there was a certain freshness to the interview process that we undertook at that time. The question then arises, how do you, well, apart from the obvious question, is this just a way to glorify the memory of a very holy yogi? Is this a way to honor someone who was thought to be a saint? Is this a literary narrative? Is this something that simply is the way of saying that the person's body was burned in cremation or fed to the animals or put in a stream, but it's a nice way of saying the body disappeared and there were rainbows and music in the sky. However, we did a lot more research in subsequent years, interviewing people in the Bon as well as the Buddhist traditions, and asked questions about how a person could attain such a remarkable state. Because after all, to dissolve the material body after you're dead seems to be almost completely unlikely, all right, something that science could not explain. My own spiritual teacher, Brother David, had encouraged me to do this research. In fact, it was his idea, because he felt that the resurrection of Jesus was possibly a kind of attainment of the rainbow body in our own heritage, going back 2,000 years. Here's a first century Jewish rabbi, prophetic teacher, miracle worker. He's crucified. 36 hours later, his body disappears. And he appears to his disciples in different forms in the days to come. Similarly, here we have a master who teaches his disciples for many years. He was about 83 when he died. He has teachings from both the Gelugpa and the Nyingma schools. He has a wonderful community of nuns who are his closest and dearest disciples. And he taught many lay people. He was one of those remarkable individuals. His name was Khenpo Ache, and his body, as I said, is thought to have disappeared completely after his death. Now, years have gone by. It seems that the training that we're receiving in these 14 sessions of meditation include not only the basic practices of concentrating the mind on an object of meditation, or else bringing the mind to a wider field of attention, something that I've already done for many years, but also to work in greater depth on purifying and healing the inner life of the person. And this is something that I have been exploring myself every single day in the past 10 years that I'm back in Italy. In fact, some of the meditations that we were doing with our eyes closed, but being aware of this luminous, awakened consciousness, this contemplative state, this is something that I do in the afternoon. So from about 2:30 in the afternoon to 4:30 in the afternoon, I do this kind of meditation myself, kind of spontaneously. And so it was good to have clarity and further teaching on that kind of an experience in this week. When I was doing dialogue with Muslims and Sikhs and Hindus and the Jewish community in North America, one of the things that was very important was, what can we learn from one another? And in our dialogue in particular with the Buddhists on the West Coast, that theme helped us really frame and shape and develop how we could talk to one another. Because it wasn't just a matter of, oh, I believe this, you believe that, you know, or our words are these words. This is the set of words we use. That's the set of words you use. But what is it that you do that I'm doing too already? What is it that's part of my tradition that perhaps I know a little bit about, but you know a lot about, all right? So, for example, there are people who think that there's no meditation in Christianity, all right? Now, that's not true, but it is also true that not enough is said and taught about our tradition of meditation in Christianity. So when we talk to Zen Buddhists, let's say, they're going to tell us a lot about meditation. And all of a sudden, something's going to click. We're going to say, you know, in fact, that's what we too do also. For example, when we have adoration of the Eucharistic host, you know, a Eucharistic adoration, what are we doing? We're sitting or kneeling before Christ present in the Blessed Sacrament and adoring Him, all right, in silence, in focused attention. Well, that's certainly a form of meditation. Or when we read the scriptures slowly and we digest them. That's meditation too. And bringing that focused attention that we learn from our Buddhist brothers and sisters to these classic Catholic Christian practices enriches them, gives them depth. And we learn from them, and we suddenly find ourselves eager to say to our fellow Christians, have you tried this? Because this will really deepen your prayer. And this will, from a deeper prayer life, will enrich also your life of service. As we mature, I'm already 68 years old, as we mature in life, we encounter the residues of our past. We encounter the memories of the past, the difficulties and the challenge of forgiving people from our past. So this kind of meditation enables us to kind of soften up the hard edges and to bring about a more universal compassion in which there is space for forgiveness. There is space for understanding. There is space also to forgive ourselves and to understand ourselves, so that in a certain sense, a lot of the tangles get untangled. And so even talking about the rainbow body, what are we saying? In some ways, it's the untangling of what we are so that we can become light for the world. Now, isn't this really the message of Jesus in the resurrection? There He is crucified, forgiving those who crucified Him. There he is in the tomb, all right, wrapped in the shroud. And in 36 hours, he triumphs over this hideous form of his execution that has completely mutilated his body. And he's not only forgiving now, but he's becoming light for the world. We're developing a dialogue of spiritual experience on a very deep level that is going to have an impact in the world at large. All right, we see a little tiny place, a little tiny school, a small community of contemplative practitioners, but from a small place with a long lever, we can move the world. And I hope we can.